Hi, welcome to Write More Light. My name is Sarah, and if you are new to the Write More Light videos, here's how it's going to go. I'm going to give this intro that I'm giving right now. Then we're going to have a kick-ass conversation with Alec Hershman, and then I'll give you updates on the Midwest Writing Center, and we'll leave you with a writing prompt. I am going to read Alec's bio. Woefully unprepared today. You may remember Alec if you are not a newcomer to Write More Light as the author of For a Second in the Dark. Alec Hershman is the author of two previous volumes of poetry, Permanent and Wonderful Storage and The Egg Goes Under. He is a grassroots labor organizer and currently serves as the chair of education for the Ypsilanti Industrial Workers of the World. He lives with his husband and dogs in Michigan. I know last time I asked if I pronounced that correctly, and I realized I again didn't prepare.
It's an odd sounding word, Greek, I believe. So yeah.
Thank you for hanging out with me again. For folks wondering, I invited Alec back because I think we took like an hour and a half last time because I was just so excited to keep talking to you. So thank you for coming back. Super excited to continue our conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me back.
Um, so okay, let's start with the book came out.
You did.
I think that it was an incredible reading. I actually there's something really special about seeing a poet read their work, and I think that's probably true of all writers, but poets in particular write with a voice,
Huh?
like a verbal voice, not like a narrative voice. Uh,
Hmm.
and it makes a huge difference, I think, to hear the cadence of the poet. So that was really, really special. Thank you for that. How has it been having the new book in the world?
Really fun. Uh, yeah, no, it's really been a pleasure. Um, I work at a library in Ann Arbor, and uh, we've got a copy of the book, and I was like shelving holds shortly, after it came out one evening, and like had to put my own book on a shelf for someone, like I don't know, a name of someone who like is not like a friend or family member, and that was the first time that I was like, huh, like it's got a life, outside of my little fascicles. And so yeah, that's been kind of cool to see it.
That's so cool.
And I don't know who's reading this book, but thanks to whoever these people are, and I hope it's doing something out there. I hope some people are enjoying it. So
Oh, that's
yeah,
so cool.
it's been really weird. And what you mentioned about hearing a poet read, it's been kind of interesting too to like get to put some literal voice to the pieces, some of which are, I think I mentioned when I came to read, are kind of old or very old in some instances. So they almost feel not like they aren't mine, but like I'm just so far removed from them that I can have a little bit more fun with them and sort of voice them a little more dramatically than I think I would if they were when they're fresh. So yeah, that's it's been great. It's been a lot of fun.
That's not what I expected you to say. Because I think about like I have this one piece that I read a lot as like a an example of how to read.
Hmm.
Um, and it's very old and I kind of hate it. But I know how to read it. I know how to perform it.
Okay.
Um, but I just always am like I end up being in that place of the person who wrote the piece, which was me, but not me anymore. Uh,
Right.
And so that kind of messes me up. But I love that what you're saying about like I can perform this outside of being who wrote the person who wrote it. At least that's my
Yeah.
understanding. And I'm gonna try
Yeah.
and have that attitude.
Yeah. I that's an unexpected thing that I think I only learned this go round with this book. And because I think I mentioned I don't, I do lots of other things besides poetry in my years, and like I don't have a lot of occasions to read. And so it's like an every couple of years thing, like I get invited to something, but it's not always as exciting and formal and glamorous as the launch party that you all threw for me. So, I don't think about it as often as maybe I should. So yeah, it was a surprise to sort of feel like, oh, I don't remember exactly what it was like to make these poems, and whatever the concerns of the speaker are are really not my concerns anymore. They're so separate, and so it really feels more like a character that that I have propriety in, and like I can voice that character or like read from this script, but it's really not as close to me as it. And I guess that closeness is like I'm still. It takes me a while to figure out like what I think about poems or what they're saying or how they might resonate in a public space. Um,
I think that's really important and really beautiful. Maybe not beautiful, but like important enough to give it a pretty adjective. Uh, and I think that that's a lesson probably, most of us need to hear about our old work. We don't have to necessarily see ourselves in it. That's gonna be like, this is therapy. Thank you.
yeah, sure, right.
Um, and I know, so we met, you had a test coming up. How did that class go?
Oh man, yeah. I just finished grinding on my A&P class, my anatomy and physiology class. It was really consuming. I mean, it was like like a half-time job this past semester, and it went well, and I was exposed to a tremendous amount of information, and I think I learned a fair amount of it. Um, so it was a little inundating and sort of overwhelming, almost by design. It was kind of like a year-long curriculum that was packed into a semester, and I am just a few days off of that, so I'm finally getting a little bit of the time I wanted to like digest some of the really cool stuff that I got to learn, but had to like regurgitate back very quickly for exams and things like that. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I also got this like I don't know a few thousand new vocabulary words that are kind of fun and that have been like getting into the poems. And
Okay,
yeah,
that's really cool.
yeah. I mean, it's a nice bonus, nice side
Yeah.
effect of learning about the body as you learn some Latin.
I mean, I love, learning in general. But yeah, we learn like specialized language can become just the most incredible metaphors, you know?
Sure,
Uh,
right.
you took that class on not on purpose. Obviously it was on purpose. For fun, right?
I did. Yeah, yeah.
It's not a bad thing. I just wanted to
No,
clarify.
it's an odd thing though, and in a way, it's strange because okay, as a poet or an artist, I'm for years I've become very used to the sort of like you talk to a stranger at a party about something that you're doing right now or working on, thinking about, and if it's poetry, they're like, you know, oh, that's cool, but what are you gonna do with that? There's this real like tacit next question discomfort of like, well, I heard what you said. I don't understand how that plugs into the world. Or they have some like very specific limited ideas of where that's supposed to go. So, obviously, oh, you want to be a professor or you want to do whatever. And so when you tell anybody that you're learning about physiology, it's very hard for folks to hear that and not think immediately of medicine. And I don't want to be a doctor, um, but that is kind of like where this track leads or this set of interests. And I was thinking about it just this morning, actually, listening to some medical podcasts that, uh, more than ever, we've got access to medical literature and medical information via the internet, via YouTube and PubMed, and this is new. Like we're kind of like the first generation of people to have that access, and so this is one of those things that I think technology did bring us, and it is an advancement. And so I'm kind of excited by this idea that anyone who's curious and has some critical reasoning skills can look at this literature themselves and start to ask questions or think about what this means. And I think medicine, as we understand, is very leaky right now. Like it's this power structure
Hmm.
that becoming more porous, and we're also like just as a society we have all of these seemingly disparate ailments and problems, health style problems, body problems that turn out to have a lot to do with one another. So I'm just kind of curious about these things. During the class I was thinking a lot that it felt almost like I was sort of accessing gate kept or guarded information, and that like this was my chance to learn about like how kidneys really work or something, because otherwise what option do we have as lay people? We have to go to a doctor through an insurance apparatus, and it's horribly bureaucratic and it's very unsatisfying, and you don't really get a lot of questions answered. And so this just felt like, I don't know, like as a citizen in the world, like I needed to like grab some of this information so that I could just start like sharing it with friends and family and talking about it at the library.
I love that so much because I'm so excited about taking classes and learning and um, the availability of information,
Hmm?
which of course there's still, you have to usually pay for education.
Right.
At the very least, you have to give it time, and who has that? Um,
Yeah.
but you're nailing something really special on the head with this, and I'm just so excited to think about it, I guess. Um, so cool. I really personally, well, now I want to take anatomy and physiology, but I'm very intimidated. Uh, Personally, I've been thinking about taking math classes because I'm just not good at it, and I would like to have some understanding. Um, and I don't
Same.
know, it feels possible, like knowing that you're doing this means that like someone is doing this, and not only that, but someone like me. So,
Yeah, totally. I mean, I was wondering if I was going to do like something mathy related next, and my answer has been like, nah.
take a
Sorry,
break.
sorry for algebra, but that's yeah. I think we should. I think there's a lot of um, I think it's a fun opportunity to study things formally when the stakes aren't the same as they were for many of us, like in college,
Mhm.
graduate. There's this kind of implied idea that this is your something to do with your identity and or your future, and it's kind of nice to like take some of those big weights off of the actual experience of engaging with the information, just to see like what resonates, what sticks.
There's also some amount of like failure, right?
Right.
Which is such a just a really intense word to
Yeah.
use about like your
Mm.
mastery of information as given in X format. I mean,
Yep.
really. And then you do, I think, feel failure, which is not,
Hmm.
yeah. I mean, that's added to the stakes when you're in a situation in which you need X credits and
Right.
yeah,
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean,
love that.
it's a particular kind of judgment, I suppose, that doesn't have to be a part of learning,
Yeah.
um, or making art or poetry or any of that.
If I'm here, if I'm here to learn, then then that's the end of the sentence, right? That's the end of the equation.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I think all education should be free and should be voluntary and should be
Yeah.
exciting. Um,
I
so
mean,
I'm
this is you're reminding me of what is said about creatives all the time. So, as writers, we get told, oh, creativity is wonderful, creativity is good. But the truth is, there's this sort of deep ambivalence about creativity where, those who would praise it in the abstract are, on some level, really hoping to kind of uh, know where it is, be able to contain it or control it. So I think that's something that is true of learning for learning's own sake too. We've heard this espoused as kind of virtue in lots of places, but when you really actually try and do it, it does make you into a weirdo. Like I
yeah,
mean, like it's not that socially intelligible. People, at best, people are going to be like, "Oh, that's cool," uh, but there's also some resistance to it, or some like does not compute responses
oh,
that you'll
so
get.
much.
Where did you find the time? What a waste. Why? Like I don't understand that. That sounds like unfun somehow.
I'm starting my MFA in a couple of weeks.
Oh, cool. All right.
And
What, tell me about it.
and that's just the primary response I'm getting from people is, but why?
Well,
And I
please
want
help.
to cry. I want to cry. There's a lot of, and there have been a few people who are very sweet and definitely well-meaning who have been like, but you're talented and educated.
Hmm.
and you have not, I don't know, like the implication is I have nothing left to learn or something, which I can't even
Hmm.
conceptualize. Um, and then other people are like, why would you pay or whatever to
Sure.
read or something to that effect? And it's
Uh-huh.
just, I don't think I can have that conversation. Like we're on such different pages ideologically, uh, that I'm just like, I need to learn from people who know more than me, who can help me be better, do better. I need to prioritize this thing that takes up all the space in my heart over, the grind or whatever. And I don't know how to open into that conversation.
Uh-huh.
It's just, I've had so many conversations that make me just like never want to speak to people again. When I'm
Right.
like, I got into grad school, and they're like, oh, for what? Like writing. And they're like, don't you already do that?
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah, I do. That's why I want to do it.
Sure. Sure.
So
Yeah.
anyway, I empathize with the end of the conversation, with the conversation just going into a dead end. Like, oh, okay.
Uh-huh.
I'm so tired.
Well, I mean, your reasons will change too
I
once
just
you
want to
do
learn,
that.
man.
Yeah. 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 I think
I
that's
can't.
that's best. I mean,
I'm
that's really it's cliche at this point to say, but like that is like the sort of thing that can't be taken from us, right? So like, learning for learning's own sake, we just get to do that if we decide to do that. Um, you know,
I think that's, and honestly, I have such strong feelings about it that I'm gonna say that it feels like an illness that we have in this world where if it isn't leading me to money or
right.
physical product, right, then it
Uh-huh.
feels meaningless to a lot of people because we have so valued this grind.
Yeah,
And I'm
totally.
kind of like, okay, well, you work and you make that money, and then what do you do when you get home?
Sure.
You watch
Right.
TV, and that's art. You play a video game, and that's art. You
Uh-huh.
read, and that's like why are we working if the thing that we do when we have free time is art?
Uh-huh. Right.
I mean,
Right.
really, I don't know anybody who goes home after work or whatever and then is like, well, it's time to do some. I mean, what do we do? Our leisure time is consuming art.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Or, I would also like I really have a hard time saying anything isn't art, but like maybe we play with our pets, maybe we cook, but is any of that productive?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I feel you about the oppressive nature of that productivity expectation. Market ideology is just influenced every aspect of our lives. Think about ourselves. This is why art's so interesting to engage with. This is why I love learning about physiology because it's sort of like let's start with the basics of like what does a cell need? What do we actually need? What has sustained our species for millennia before we became absolutely obsessed with this kind of singular idea of market value, productivity, an economic understanding, a rational understanding of society, which yeah, that leads us into all sorts of terrible, miserable making places. But yeah, you know, yeah, there's some antidote in art, and honestly, the way I think about it now, I think we talked a little about this last time, but I have this protective feeling about art because art is this kind of contested terrain. Like the market really loves art because it's not totally digestible, but also it's fascinated with it. And so I feel like market forces are like circulating around art and artists and creative endeavors all the time. Like anything that hasn't really been completely atomized by the market and assigned a value and a price tag and all of that is really really intriguing to the market. And so I have to be constantly careful, I think, as an artistic person when I'm looking for opportunities or funding or things like that, to sort of squint at these resources and ask like, well, where's the heart of this opportunity? Is it really about converting art into the market, or is it about kind of protecting art from market forces? And that can be confusing. It really gets murky in all of these formal situations. So,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't have I don't have an answer for this.
well, I think one of the things that I learned, from doing an MFA, and I learned from doing some other like formal poetry stuff, uh, is that it can be you can kind of there's some fuel in that confusion, but ultimately the best thing that any of us I think can do as makers is figure out how to what part of that making do we really have a natural fidelity to, just a sort of automatic passion for, a commitment towards, because that's the part that you don't want to lose sight of, and that can start to become kind of entwined with a professional identity, for example, or an opportunity to do something cool or publish something cool, and so not that those things um, don't serve the art. A lot of times they do, but not always. And so it's just kind of like, I think the good news is that like everyone who makes stuff has access to that most sort of fundamental important kernel of it, which is like you in a room with your computer or your paper writing. That's the learning for learning's own sake. Like everyone can do it. Everyone has fundamental access to being, a writer or creative writing. Like nobody needs a license to do this. Uh, you don't need permission. You don't, like those things can be helpful. They can be fun and they can be facilitative, but they are not required. Uh, you do need a medical license to be a doctor.
And I want to underscore that too. Like I don't want to I don't because I'm so excited to go to school because I love school. But no one needs to go to school to do or make art or even have an education in it. I'm trying to not use the word expert. I feel like we can talk about the expert in the room, but the idea of expertise gets murky. Um,
Mhm.
you're like, yes, I've read those texts.
Nope, nope. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I don't believe that there should be any barrier to access for any of these things or
Hmm.
barrier to using the word. We say a lot at the Writing Center, if you write, you're a writer, because so many people have a hard time calling themselves a writer, even though they may
Right.
read every day.
Right.
Just so yucky. It's a
Yep.
word. We can use it.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. Right. I mean, there's two. It's like the same for experts in a manner of speaking, like, or writers. Like the substance of the credential it belongs to whoever does it, and whoever like acquires information and knows about things. And then there are these titles, like writer with a capital W or something, that also exist. And the way I understand it right now, institutions, especially of higher education, that grant credentials, are in the business of trying to align those titles with the actual knowledge and the actual substance. And and so in some sense, knowledge that escapes its purview is threatening. Writing that happens outside of writing contexts is also either like unintelligible or uninteresting or threatening or whatever. And so like there is a kind of capitalist project behind these labels. They want to gobble everything up. And I think about this for poetry a lot, because when I was a younger and naiver learner and first exposed to poetry, I was initially attracted to it and really struck by how subversive poetry is, right? It's always saying multiple things at the same time, and that is just inherently subverting the way that all other communication works. And so I thought poetry was automatically just this kind of cool, queer thing, that it was always had like this extra room for saying something politically uh, provocative, that or expressing something that otherwise couldn't be expressed. Um, but also, just I don't know, that multiplicity of meanings. I think. So, that's what attracted me to it. But I also see now that because it harnesses that energy, poetry with a capital P is this project that's trying to like to wrap everything into it, right? So like, oh, really good song lyrics sort of become part of poetry, and
Mhm.
really political propaganda becomes part of poetry, and uh, you
I have a
know,
book of speeches that I keep on my essay shelf. I
uh-huh,
probably have a few books of speeches. There's some sermons in there.
sure, yeah,
And there, I love the word felicity, and I never have the opportunity to use it, but I would say anyone with an amount of felicity, any work that has such felicity, uh, it's hard to separate them from saying, yes, that's poetry.
uh-huh, yeah, right. It's this interesting category that has, there's something about poetry that is really interesting and volatile, and that's why I think it's like a contested terrain. Power is interested in poetry, because it gathers all this dissident energy. Uh, but also dissidence is interested in poetry because it can't be contained or pinned down totally the way that some other things can. And poetry is kind of notable for not having a topic. Like I guess other forms of writing don't necessarily have a topic either, but they at least have like intentionality, the
Mhm.
sort of general idea
I'm
of like,
talking about an essay or a speech, you know that it's going to have a thesis.
right, there's a thesis, there's a topic. Poetry doesn't, we talk about that a lot, and that it doesn't have, there's a sort of a subject that gets to emerge more than is necessarily, decided beforehand. So without a topic, what do we all have in common when it comes to poetry? And it's something sort of pseudo religious. Like I think that one way to characterize the energy that gathers around poetry, maybe around creative writing more generally, might be something like piety. I've been thinking about this word a lot recently, and piety, it belongs to both people who are very genuinely religious and spiritual, but also to people who are just pious. And and so I find this one of the like complications of our society and the way that we construe art and writing and poetry within our society, our very capitalist neoliberal society is like, well, you know, if someone tells me that they love poetry, I don't know on the face of it that what that means. It
Mhm.
doesn't. It will have something in common, kind of the same way that people go to a certain church, but you don't know if you're sort of having real communion with ideas and texts the same way that they are, or in a way that would allow you to have the conversation. So I've had to learn that distinction kind of exists, because at first, I really thought that everyone was a sort of true believer, and now you see sometimes you see like major corporations sponsoring a poet to do something, and it's like, why does Coca-Cola want a poet, or why does Amtrak need a poet to ride their trains
Okay,
to be
that I looked, I saw that program.
it's cool. I mean, it would be a cool experience, but it's also like that is the market saying there's room for poets, and that is something that I find I still struggle with this, because in my more romantic idea about what poetry means to me, it is always dissident. It's sort of inherently dissident, and so the idea that there is a job or an acceptable or even celebrated path to being a poet is something that is confusing to me. It's confusing to me. I mean,
There aren't
obviously the
many.
part of me wants some of it, but then the artist part of me is like,
What does it say
what?
about me if I engage with this? And, you know,
Yeah, and there are lots of terrific artists who get lots of accolades and acclaim. It's an interesting spectacle, but I think that's why we like it too. I think that's why we're interested in, um, you know, prizes and fanfare and stuff, is because it's like this constant crucible in which we're like looking at like, oh, how much does title, credential, all the official sort of status stuff actually coincide with the resonance piece, or the energy, the dissidence. Those things are always in tension, at least the way I see them. But I'm kind of a skeptic.
and what if I take this Amtrak residency and I write God, what was that song that everybody sings now, but it's like a really depressing song? My Country 'Tis of Thee.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that one.
Uh yeah, like I'm taking this because Amtrak is owned by the government. Uh
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
take this residency and then I write as a result, a protest piece about the residency. Like, is that
Yeah.
critical? Is that badass? And do
Yeah,
I
I don't
lose
know.
my sponsorship? I
Yeah. Good questions all. Why do we have a poet laureate? Like,
I
uh,
because we believe in the arts. Um,
but what does that mean for a state like ours?
yeah.
The American state, which is so militaristic, which has such a violence-inducing influence on societies around the globe. That what does it mean to be an artist uh, with this kind of state? Um, it's really interesting to think about, and there's a very good chance that the those who would become a poet laureate are probably, if not entirely, like 95% pacifist folks who have good social intentions and ideas about peace. Um, so it's just odd. It's an uncomfortable merger of ideas.
Well, I also think, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but choosing the poet laureate or
Hmm.
something like that, but the poet laureate of the country in particular, um, is such a political act too.
Sure. Yeah.
And then also, are the people making these selections poetry readers?
Right. Does that matter? I mean, what does that even mean, right?
It's yeah, it's wild. You
Yeah.
mentioned something earlier about two things I really wanted to hit on. Piousness of poetry. I
Hmm.
have felt and not known how to say this without sounding like I'm trying to literally go to church. But I've been
Okay.
trying to say that for so long that like each poem to me is exactly what I would consider a prayer.
Mhm.
And I don't go to church. I guess I'm open to it. I'm not, my biggest problem is getting out of bed on a Sunday. Uh,
Right.
um, but you say that and people start to make assumptions based on the language you're using, which I love. Language can be so specific, but it's also like an openness to understanding full meanings of words is where it gets complicated. When I say this is a prayer, I don't mean I'm saying the rosary, but I do mean that this is what I would like the rosary to be.
Mm.
I know.
Okay.
You're so
That's
hard.
No, that's nice. I mean, and that what you're speaking to is the need for that genre of expression or engagement. So yeah, I mean, we don't have that in a largely secular context, right? Like, part of the whole neoliberal market society thing is like also atheism or at least secularism. And we still have a really human need for prayer, or for some kind of spiritual consideration. And
Mhm.
and I think poetry is definitely one of those spaces for, reflection on um, you know, dilemmas of moral significance, or moral valence, and reflections on beauty and how that, or aesthetic things, how those stir us. And so yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely something to the replacement of prayer by poetry in some contemporary contexts. Or, if you go back to when they weren't quite so separate, there's lots of religious poetry.
Right. I don't. But that's different.
Maybe that could be a way in for those of us who are not religious in the sort of Judeo-secular or Judeo-Christian way. Like,
Yeah.
think about, I think about you know John Donne's poetry, or as a way of does God have to remain totally abstract to me, or totally like hypothetical and siloed in like some other tradition? I think literature is one of those ways that
I think John Donne
now
is such a good
part of
example.
our tradition can become. Say what?
John Donne was like the example. That was so good. You just pulled that right out. You were ready to go.
Well, to be fair, I think I'm kind of like you in that like I don't turn to explicitly religious poetry very often. So, there's only a limited set of where the overlap has happened, and it tends to be like some of the greats uh that have persisted. So I
That's such a
know there are
good
contemporary
example.
religious poets too, who I
I know that he, had actual poems of worship, but I think every single one of his poems was a poem of worship, even if it wasn't about God. I just think that was genius. I mean, I've read Donne, but I never would have thought of it in this moment. Love artists. Um, so um I'm just gonna give the subject header here and see if you can just talk for me. Uh,
Okay.
about queer eco-poetics as something
Oh,
that exists and is made possible by other adaptations. Um,
yeah.
do you do you feel able to spitball around this idea?
Oh, yeah. Um, so kind of like I
Also,
was
should we
saying
talk
about,
about eco-poetics? Can you define eco-poetics for us first?
yeah, okay, yeah, that's a good place to start. So for me, all eco-poetics means is a sense of how environment impacts us. Um, it doesn't necessarily imply for me a sentimental attachment to saving the environment or to being green necessarily. I think that a lot of what we stand to gain or discover by asking questions about how we relate to our environment would lead us in the direction of things that incidentally are more peaceful, more sustainable, etc. But that's all I really mean by eco poetics is like this understanding of humans as um, animals in the environment, and that we are totally influenced by all the time in ways that I think in most of our society and most of our sort of workaday thinking that we don't recognize. The weather and chemicals and foods and people and animals all have these influences on us. So that's kind of what I mean by eco poetics. Although I have discovered that I'm kind of a little different or out of step in some ways from many folks who take up the mantle of eco poetics because they are really thinking about um, specific landscapes, and all often with the added feature of in a what we would consider an environmentalist, you know, green kind of frame of reference. So I don't necessarily mean that part, but for me, that's sort of part and parcel to the queerness part, because I think about queerness. This is how I identify. I could probably, also call myself a gay man for convenience's sake, but I really think of myself as queer, and by that I mean resistant to and claiming
One of my
space.
favorite words.
Yeah, resistant to something normative, claiming space to to move, or to be free or sort of self-determining. Uh, And so I think that is also what poetry can do relative to, say, more linear forms of writing or more sort of straightforward didactic forms of writing. And so in that way, I see queerness and poetry as being as sharing something potentially in common. Um, and as far as adaptation, the way I kind of came at this a couple years ago was to try and I'm trying to sort of build this like three-part analogy, like between sort of queerness or sexual identity and writing, whether it's sort of top down or bottom up writing. Um, and then in evolutionary terms, there's this concept that I have found very useful called the spandrel. The spandrel in
I didn't
evolutionary
use
biology.
that word because I was it
You look
felt
it up.
like jargon to me.
Yeah, it's a weird word, and you know what? Actually, it was in Deborah Diggs has a sequence about Freud and Darwin and Marx. Which it's lofty, but it's really good. It's a bunch of these like sprung rhythm, maybe sonnety sized pieces. I haven't read it in a few years, but that's where I first encountered the word spandrel, and then that sent me, to the dictionary, and then from there, I got to this paper from 1979 by Gold and Lewontin about evolutionary biology and this kind of mistake that they think characterized a lot of uh, evolutionary thinking in the 20th century. And the thinking was that they thought was a mistake was uh, we look at X and Y trait or feature in a species, and it's for a specific functional purpose. So, why do uh, penguins have hook shaped beaks or whatever? It's to be able to do something in their environment. And this is how a lot of us are familiar with biology, is sort of thinking in these evolutionary functional terms as we atomize everything into features or traits, and then we ask what are those traits for. That is a very linear, positive, and normative approach. And what the paper that critiqued this approach basically says is it says sometimes as a result of doing something functional, you get all of this other stuff that just comes along and does not actually have a purpose of its own. And so in architecture, for example, when you make an arch next to another arch, there's a space in the middle. There just has to be because of geometry. It's these little triangular, wedgy, curved edge shaped spaces. And those are spandrels. Those are called spandrels. The cathedral at San Marcos in Italy, they're decorated in this lavish, beautiful way. And so their point was, hey, this exists in nature too. This exists in biology. We have lots of things that don't actually serve a purpose, and it is foolish and kind of you know uh, stupidly normative to imagine that everything has a purpose. It's this very like the same way that we think all sex is procreative. It's that kind of thing. There
You're
may
entirely
be
blowing my mind right now.
yeah, there's a reason for some of it, and then other parts of it come along for the ride. And the crux of the
The
matter for me, poet, is
pieces
that
of
we have to.
nature can just be.
That was kind of a jumble, but those are the broad strokes. So I've started thinking about okay, queer and spandrel and poem share this affinity in common. In that those are all domains in which we have to come and make the meaning. It's not just handed to us by nature. That is where we can kind of ascribe our own meaning. And so that's why I started thinking about this question, is a poem a spandrel? I think so. I think it's a spandrel in that, like, for example, language probably has a functional reason, right? It's so useful. It seems to be continuous with animal communication. So there's a reason that we communicate. It really literally helps us survive. It helps us pass on copies of genes. But what is poetry? Poetry is the space in which it is possible to use language without communicating. We can divorce language from its purpose, so to speak. And I think that is the spandrel. It's this thing that we get to do, not because poetry, was designed for that purpose and that it helps us survive in that way, but it exists because we've already got language. So here's this cool thing we get to do with it. Um,
I'm taking notes. My cat's on
okay.
top of my notebook, so it's
I'm
almost like a
blabbering, but
business
these
card.
are some of the this is like my personal eco poetics that I've been you know weaving together in by myself here for a couple of years. So that's what I was talking about when you emailed. Those were some of the
I'm
broad
so
strokes.
this is the first time this idea has been introduced to me. And I think maybe it's cultural, maybe it's just humans. We want to put things in boxes. And so when we look at the shape of the penguin's beak, um, it makes sense that we're saying, well, this is because of the digging or whatever. Um, I actually feel like now that I'm thinking about penguins, I have no idea what they look like. And I'm seeing the ones from the cartoon, the Pixar
Yeah,
cartoon, and it's not,
yeah.
there's a cartoon in my brain, not anything real. Uh,
Okay. I don't know either.
um,
I realized I said it. I don't know why I picked. You know why I picked Penguin is because I was just reading Will Alexander's poetry, The Blood Penguin, and so Penguin was like primed in my brain. But yeah, yeah, I don't know about
my
Penguin.
brain is really like, what is penguin? But um, but all the same, anytime I have a curiosity, I start to sort of give it an etymology in my head on my own.
Hmm.
And that, I mean, you know what I'm saying when I say that. Like how did this become this way? And
Hmm.
okay, here's one of my favorite ones. And by favorite, I mean it makes me really angry. Uh, but you've been a barista. We've talked about this.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
hate Americanos. I hate how they taste, and I hate them as a concept. And spending time in Europe,
Hmm.
I wanted goddamn drip coffee. I
Hmm.
wanted a cup of black coffee. Yes, I love coffee. And you can't get that in Europe.
Mm. Right.
But they will give you, and my favorite word for it, because this is what made me figure this out. Well, you can ask for American coffee, and that'll be an Americano, which is not American coffee. It's espresso and water. Uh,
Right.
I don't want espresso.
Uh-huh.
I want the coffee. I want the water to sit, the grounds to sit in the coffee for a little longer, so it tastes a little better and has a little more caffeine in it. Thank you very much. Uh,
Uh-huh.
and in French anyway, I don't know about other countries. I don't speak a lot of languages. It's called a long coffee.
Uh-huh.
So many places it's an Americano or an American coffee. In France, it's a long coffee, café à langer.
Uh-huh.
And that's the thing that did it for me. They were like, the Americans want lots of liquid in their coffee. This
Right.
is where we get the Americano, right? It is not drip coffee. It's people wanting drip coffee who can't get it, so they add water to their espresso.
Right.
Um, and you can do that sort of tracking with anything and often come up with the right answer and often come up with the wrong answer. Um, and I'm assuming, I guess, that I'm not alone in trying to find the explanation for the shape of the beak or why anyone
Mm.
would think this is what Americans drink. Uh, some do.
Yeah.
Surgeons drink a lot of Americanos.
Uh-huh.
I was a
Uh-huh.
barista at a VA, and it was like I eventually guessed people's drink based on their uniform
Interesting. Okay. That was
correctly.
fun.
Eventually, it was
I, I,
easy.
I kind of know what you're talking about. Yeah.
um, and
Really a
so
cool
it
book.
is honestly a brand new idea that things can exist without function. And it's not like I don't know that like intellectually. I have a
Hmm.
I have art.
Yeah. Right.
Um, a lot of my art, exists because exists in my space because it pleases me, or
Hmm.
it was made because someone needed to make it. But
Yeah.
the thing I'm kind of pointing at is a macrame that was kind of a hand-me-down because the person who made it couldn't sell it and was moving. Um,
Hmm.
I didn't ask for it, and she couldn't sell it, and now it's in my home. It's decorative.
Right.
Um,
Right.
the idea that this could exist in nature is entirely blowing my mind. And I think decorative is the wrong word. Decorative implies that the purpose is to decorate.
Right. Right. Yes.
Um, but these are
Yeah.
traits that follow that are
Yeah.
associated with the thing of necessity. That's great. I
Yeah.
know. I'm just gonna
Right.
keep
Right. I mean,
talking.
I think we're so doggedly attached to thinking, there's almost like you know, a godlike comfort or, in this idea that everything has a reason, everything has a purpose. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't believe that the natural world isn't sort of just the way that it needs to be, or that there's not some sort of marvelous order. But the I think we are really overdoing it when we get to the point that everything has its own uh, explicit function. And so, I think it's fine. I've had to sort of reckon on this as a queer person myself that like maybe, yeah, I mean, especially after just studying anatomy and physiology, like I have to concede that the architecture of the human bodies that we know and love is very much set up for reproduction. I mean, and heterosexual reproduction at that. And yeah, it plugs right into the rest of biology and theories of evolution that that should be a primary function of a lot of things. But that doesn't mean that that in society as we understand it, that being queer isn't important and valuable and valid in all of these other ways. It just means that like I can't come up with or I don't really depend upon an explanation of gayness as like uh having this functional basis in biology. It may or it may not. There are some proposals, but I think that's the wrong way to sort of I think that's wrong. I mean, I think that's an interesting question to ask, but it's certainly not one on which anybody's dignity ought to depend or validity socially. And so, the combination of those two things, I think, leads to sort of poor scientific thinking, but also, bad social situations of esteem and discrimination and all that.
I get to thinking a lot about when I think about things like this, like pre-industrial living,
Yeah.
living in community without, I guess, the burden of work as we know it today.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think because I don't feel like I have a lot of like usable skills. Uh, um, and I think it would be absurd if everyone had children living in a community, right?
Right.
If everyone's got kids, like what else are we doing? Because we still
Sure.
need to eat, which we do for pleasure, by the way.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
just like we sex for pleasure, just like we paint for pleasure, right? These are things that humans have, I mean, maybe we drew before we painted, but these are things that humans have always done for
Mm-hmm.
pleasure. Um, and in this, hypothetical non-industrial community that I'm living in, I'm
Uh-huh.
not I'm not here with children and I'm not here building. I would love to, but I don't have those
Right.
skills.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so I'm probably taking care of your kids while you build because
Uh-huh.
you know how to
Sure.
build.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I like hanging out with them, but I don't want to take them home at night, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't, I can't imagine. See, and this is me. I'm trying to explain it. I'm trying to explain my place in this,
Huh? Uh-huh.
um, which I think is also like we can just relax and not explain it. But I
That's
think
exactly
very much we don't. It would be absurd if everyone was procreating and interested in it.
sure. Right. We would not be a human, we would not be the primates that we are if everyone was self-interested in a market rational way entirely and totally cutthroat and we were all like tiny entrepreneurs and nothing else. I mean, care is this completely not market rational phenomenon that occurs spontaneously and of course it has survival advantages, but it's I'm just interested in how hegemonic that particular trope is that everything must plug back into the functional basis. And I think that it's worth asking what are some of these spaces that simply might exist as a result of the general thrust of things, the general architecture of having a society, like eating for pleasure. Like obviously we eat for survival to get energy out of food and pleasure
I swear, if I eat one more bowl of
like a
oatmeal, I'm
spandrel.
gonna lose my mind.
But we wouldn't want to give it up either. I mean, it doesn't mean that it's not meaningful. I guess that's where I come from. It doesn't mean that even if these things come along for some sort of evolutionary functional ride, we make meaning of them. And I think this is important because this is where responsibility comes in art and in life. It is this is what it means to have human freedom, or the sort of sensation or feeling of free will, is that we have a responsibility to make these meanings ourselves. And I think it's kind of disingenuous and lazy if we attribute them to something like divine order or totally an evolutionary basis. I think there's a lot of space that could be inscribed lots of different ways, and so that's kind of what I love about poetry in particular is that It's one of these things that I don't like to make too much of in terms of its like value, because I think that's its primary value is its evasion of value, if that makes sense.
I'm going to be obsessed with Spandrel for at least 6 months.
Yay! I guess I should really think of this as a spandrel poetics more than like an eco poetics per se. I was kind of like drawn to eco poetics because it's already a thing and people already do that, and I thought maybe this is something to do with what I care about, but I think it's a
I mean,
little
if the
separate.
term is first environmental, you know, maybe it's
Yeah,
not. I don't I don't actually know.
yeah. I mean, things are slippery. They're kind of hard to pin down. If this is all confusing or sounds ridiculous to folks who are out there and listening, I understand. Sorry about that. This has just been ethereal in my head for a couple of years, and I've had a hard time. I tried once to try and write this out in like a little bit of a manifesto, but it's surprisingly
There's
tricky.
so
There's
much
something
going on.
like analogies lined up next to each other that makes it multiplex.
Well, yeah, there's so much to how do you soundbite this?
Yeah, I struggle to do that, as I think you've just seen.
And I like my go-to word, I don't know if I like this, but I'm interested in. My go-to word was decorative, and I think that that also implies purpose. So it doesn't feel correct. I feel like it's freckles. Um, you know,
Uh,
um,
well, yeah.
if
Although
you're
I think
gonna
we
tell me freckles have a purpose, I'm just gonna leave.
no, I don't know. They may not. They probably do. It's probably like a melanocyte thing, in response to UVB exposure or something like that. But yeah, yeah, I think decorative. I know what you mean. Decorative is another one of those things. But is when we say purpose, just because it has meaning, you know, I
I
don't know
think
that say that nature created that purpose. If that, I guess that's what I'm really trying to tease apart here, right?
I'm sure actually, like if I looked up the word and I looked up hegemony and I looked up felicity so that I could like talk about them, which
Okay.
I'll do now. Felicity is the ability to find appropriate expression for one's thoughts, and hegemony is the social, cultural, ideological, or economic influence exerted by a dominant group. I'm sure if I looked up decorative, it wouldn't say something intended to decorate. And then if I looked up decorate, it wouldn't be like, I'm sure that
Right.
purpose is not inherent to the meaning of decorative,
Mhm.
but you say it and you're like, ah, yes, this thing, like this here,
Yeah.
you can't see, there's one closer. But this one actually is just art. It's just an image, just. Um, and I do have it as decoration.
Mhm. Mhm.
Purpose is the purpose is that I like it. Like
Right. I think the difference is in whether or not, into what extent does it retain that potential energy, that dissident energy, that resisting energy that says, I'm not totally uh, reducible to my purpose.
writing that down too.
Not like I'm not gay. I'm just also queer. And that's the sort of superset idea. It's not that poetry doesn't work in a top down way sometimes. It's not that it doesn't express things or act as communication. It's just that it's not reducible to communication.
What's more? Oh, another thing, because I'm not totally reducible to my purpose. We, so many of us look so hard for a purpose for ourselves. And if we could relax on that, we'd probably be happier.
Yeah, I think so.
I exist because I exist.
Yeah. I mean, that is honestly one of the best lessons that poetry has taught me. Is like, these anxieties that you've mentioned about time and you know, marketable skills or things like that. Uh, you know, Poetry doesn't really make sense when you try and cram it into those metrics. And so if you decide that you are into it anyway and you spend time with it, what it can teach you, among other things, is like, oh, just existing outside of those metrics feels good. It might be sustaining in some way. So yeah, I think that is one of the things that we need spandrels for. I mean, it's not like we can't escape them. They're just these things are
We need them.
they just come along for the ride. It's kind of like power is never total. It's like functionality is also not total. There's always going to be spaces between functional projects, and that's where these interesting stochastic edges are. So yeah, the poetry lives in there, I think. But I think that it's possible to make the mistake that, and I think many people do, that poetry is only decorative, only communicative, only purposeful, only beautiful, only good. So this is like I mean, I make poems, so I generally think that's a good thing to do. Or like I think it's a project that I find worthy, but I don't really feel totally comfortable with the idea that all poetry is inherently good or useful or right. Poetry can be propaganda too. Poetry can be harmful, um, which is something that's actually kind of hard to bear in mind if you do it in a professional context in which in which market forces would like to ask you to only see this activity as virtuous or special or valuable. So yeah, I mean, poetry is more like a spandrel. It's just there. It's up
This
to us to.
may this may not be the time for me to say this, but I would take a class on this. Uh,
What is it though? If I could tell you what it
well,
was,
I
like
think
if there was.
the class, I'm not seeing it as like an informational class. I'm seeing it as like a craft class.
Okay, okay.
Poetry as Spandrel.
Okay, yeah. And you know
And we
why
can do
this.
some reading about like why things exist that don't have purpose.
Hmm,
The language is so complicated.
right,
But then we create because we create.
right. Yes.
I'm getting so excited. I feel
Poetry.
like I'm blushing. I'm so excited. Maybe I have a fever. I don't.
Oh, okay. This is I'm excited to talk about it with you because I have no idea if any I'm excited this makes sense to another human.
I'm gonna be like, I'm
Oh,
probably going to go and buy
okay.
books on Spandrel, and it's gonna be like, I can't read this. This is a biology textbook.
The I can send you the Golden Lowenton paper. It's pretty approachable. Um, I'm not a biologist either, so there's plenty of it that's like a
I mean, you
little
took
bit.
that AMP class, so.
Yeah, but they're talking about Noah and
Also, don't we
species.
have a couple of organs that aren't doing anything?
No, I don't think we do. To
Oh,
be honest, I don't think we do. There are now in medical arrogance. I think that there are
we
organs
make assumptions.
that we can survive without several of our organs. But that doesn't mean that they're not useful to us. Um, you could survive without your colon, but I wouldn't recommend it. So
Doesn't sound like something I want to do.
no, no, and I don't know that you live a good life without it either. I mean, I think that that's just medical arrogance when they say you don't need your appendix, you don't need both kidneys, you don't need your colon. Um, you know, this is we are products, for better or worse, of evolution over millennia, and that's a pretty long time. Even despite AI and our learning algorithms and all that, nature is still going to give us a run for our money at this point because that's a long time to refine the recipe. Um, so
I wonder
but
too, with that medical arrogance, if we're like interrupting some things that could be very good for us.
totally, oh totally. I mean, this isn't Spandrel stuff per se because we're back in the realm of like what is function and what's useful.
I'm
Uh, but I think
sorry.
related maybe obliquely. I think we get it wrong in lots of different ways, and I think we suffer from bad ideas about self and like what is. an autonomous self, and by not recognizing how the environment influences us, I think that's actually where a lot of chronic illness comes from. But bracket that, because that's a wormhole that could take another month. I just wanted to say, like, in terms of like the body, if you want like an example of a spandrel in the body, I think one example they
It's freckles.
is the chin
Oh,
in human. So, for example, why do we have chins? Um, well, I guess there were some papers about this, speculating, sort of just so stories, proffering ideas about what the chin is for, maybe signaling to other primates about our dominance or place in status
well, our face
hierarchies.
had to end somewhere.
Exactly. Well, that's exactly it. And this is their point about spandrels is that, yeah, you just can't have a human. You can't overhaul humans to make us bipedal and have us have good masticating apparatus here without having this. This is just like that
The
corner of the
bottom of the
arch.
face.
Right. Yeah.
Oh my
Just so
God, you made me understand.
somewhere. Yeah.
It's
So
just the bottom of
so I mean, so that's I think we
I've
should
said
think
a
about
lot of times in my life, that's just how my face is. So now I feel justified in doing that.
it is just how your face is. And now tie it back to like what we were talking about earlier with like expertise. So, remember that 40 years ago, 50 years ago, there are scientists running around trying to explain to the lay audience why this exists and coming up with a functional explanation for it. And they're the experts. But in this particular instance, it looks like that was kind of ridiculous. And I think the point is that this is happening all around us, that we're being fed these kind of scientific explanations for why things exist. And maybe I think that's the general disposition that we should approach this from, is like, well, maybe, but also we should remember that like it might just be where your face ends, and it might actually just have nothing to do with its own purpose. It might just be a consequence of other bigger things that are happening in the environment, or pressures to shape us.
I'm so excited. Oh my gosh. I was really trying to think. I mean, I came up with freckles. Uh,
I'm gonna look up what freckles are for now. You got me kind of curious,
the
but
purpose of them.
yeah, like why freckles? I mean, we know that melanin in the skin is protective
Mhm.
against UVB radiation, and serves other purposes too. So I think freckles are aligned with that purpose, but I don't know. I don't know if the speckly.
Like a
Uh,
growing shield of them.
yeah, I don't
I
know if
married I
that's like,
married a ginger, and
okay
freckles like fade and come back too.
with sun exposure
I
probably.
don't. I have olive skin. My dad's Middle Eastern. It's not. I've got
Hmm.
moles, but I don't have proper freckles.
Yeah,
I'm fascinated by freckles.
yeah, yeah. Freckles are cool.
Like a shield. Kind of
Yeah.
temporary. Maybe
Or
cancer.
or maybe they're a spandrel. Like maybe a freckle is a functional response, but the fact that they pattern as a bunch of speckles, that might just be that might just be like what happens because of like the distance between melanocyte activity, or something like that. I don't know. But I guess it's like it doesn't. We should be cautious to attribute a purpose to it in that sort of linear just so way. Like that is top down. I am writing a composition essay, and this is my thesis statement. And like maybe your thesis statement is right and corresponds to truth and reality, or maybe it's just an example of a sort of social imaginary thing that you're promulgating. Um,
And I also have a really fun prompt, and that's just, explain something you don't know, right?
yeah, right.
I might do that. I
We
really
do it all
like,
the time,
I
but
really
this
like,
time you don't know it, right?
yeah, I really like that. I have kept you over an hour now.
Oh
Um,
wow.
and I'm having a ball, but do you have more things to do? Um, what do we have coming up at the Midwest Trading Center? That's the part of the show we're at now. Let's see. Okay, we're in our year-end giving phase. If you are someone who does charitable giving at the end of the year, MWC would love to have your donation. We have a generous $5,000 matching donation, so your money will go twice as far when you donate. And as you probably know by now, when you support the Writing Center, you support working artists, living artists, and art in our community. A dollar spent in our community stays 4 times longer than a dollar spent at like a big box store. And we pay artists at the Writing Center, which means that more art can get made. That sounded so commercially. More art can get made. This is my robot voice. Um, Otherwise, we don't have active things going on for the rest of the year. We're pretty excited to have a small break from activity, but of course, Writer's Studio meets both in person and online on the first and third Saturdays of the month. The online schedule will be a little different in January because I'll be out of town for school. Um, I'll be busy on Saturdays for school. How's that? We have our first workshop of the year, January 18th. That's a Thursday. It's online called Vertical Moments in Fiction with Logan Hoffman Smith. It's going to be about adding depth to our stories. Logan is a recent graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and is one of the most enthusiastic people I've ever seen in a classroom setting. So I'm personally very excited to have someone more than excited than me in the room. um, yeah, more is coming in the new year. Stay tuned. Uh, Alec, did you have a prompt for us?
Oh,
I know we talked about it really briefly and then I
well,
forgot.
I do. I was thinking about this sort of top down versus bottom up compositional stuff, and the prompt that I mean, I hadn't prepared a prompt, but when you asked me, I thought, oh yeah, I could see exactly how that would relate to a
Mhm.
poem that I've been into recently. Not mine. This is a Chase Twitchell poem, but maybe I should read that and then give the prompt from it if that's not
Yeah, love it. And I'll can you tell me the name so I can put it in the comments too?
notes. I don't know if it's available online or not, but this is Old Lang Syne for the new year. So this is a New Year's Christmas timey poem, and the author is Chase Twitchell in this collected or
I
this
misspelled that.
selected volume. But can you see that? Oh,
Thank you. Oh, I love that
uh,
cover.
it's from an earlier collection too. I don't know. I don't remember exactly.
Looks like it's available through the Yale Review online.
Oh, good. It's from her book in 2005 called Dog Language.
I think I just accidentally downloaded it. Sorry. You go ahead. I'm gonna mute myself.
Okay. All right. Well, here's a poem. That's a cool poem called Old Lang Syne for the new year. Uh, and I think it does something interesting that maybe we can uh, take a prompt from. So this is the poem, Old Lang Syne. Perfume of snow melting in the hall on the slates. Dull with old smoke, the eyes of the moose preside. His antlers uphold someone's wet gloves. He has a bald spot on his neck where people stroke him for luck and a wreath of balsam. At 15, I touched the place where the world touched him. Fly back, wild flocks of the senses, eavesdrop at the shrines of the fireplace and bar. Bring something back, live coal of lipstick or some resinous perfume for the new year. Summers, we'd steal out onto the golf course of the private club to make love under the Perseid shower, soaked by the wet velvet green. They were just boys, but we longed for them and lay with them. Who would refuse such an imprint? I wear it still like a string of cold beads. There's a virgin sadness trapped in the old house, museum of summer, furnace cranked up for Christmas. The adults stir their cocktails with icicles. The kids kiss in the halls. 4 generations of match strikes stripe the blackened hearth. The fire eyes of the andiron owls are watching the men who have wrapped the dog in a towel. Mrs. M's bleared mouth repeats that quills are hydraulic. Cut off the tips and they'll come right out, which turns out to be untrue. They use pliers, and afterward the dog wags in apology, and the drinking resumes. So that's the poem. And as you can hear, it is a kind of nostalgic memory poem. But what I thought was particularly interesting about it is that there's this modal shift right at the end of the first stanza. You can't really see exactly where the stanza breaks are, but the turn of fly back, wild flocks of the senses, eavesdrop at the shrines of the fireplace and bar, bring something back. You know, fly, eavesdrop, bring. These are all imperative uh, commands, and they seem to be commands to the self or to the speaker's self to go back and recover sensory information, which this poem is just full of. Smells, some gorgeous, vivid imagery, and so the prompt, just the nutshell version that I would take from this poem is try writing a poem in which you give yourself the instruction that
Mm.
the rest of the poem carries out. And don't even necessarily think that you have to begin there. This poem doesn't. This poem sort of begins in memory and then gives itself the instruction to begin eavesdropping when, really already it has been in the space. So think about that apparatus of sort of self instruction at some point in the poem, and I think that's broad enough that should lead to a lot of
I love this.
different possibilities.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm going, well, I just said I had things to do. I'm going to do it. I'm going to make time for it. Uh,
Let me know if
thank
that works out. I just made this up, and it just I happened to be reading this yesterday and thought, oh, this is a really cool one for
This is the one. Thank you so
yeah.
much for hanging out with me today. I intend to continue to demand your attention. And for folks hanging out at home, as always, please write more light into your life.